This is joint work with Alexandros Gelastopoulos, who is now at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Toulouse, Gaël at University Pompeu Fabra in Barcelona, and Arnaud van der Rijt, who is at the European University Institute in Florence. All right, so let's start with a small quiz. So, which one of these two paintings do you think is Van Gogh? Okay, so let's go around the room and see what people think. Maybe we can start from Trukti back there.
Maybe the right one?
This one? Yeah. All right, so Trukti went for this one. Then, what do you think?
My assumption would be the left.
1-1. All right, so what do you think?
I would have thought the left one.
Left one. How about over here?
Probably the left, yeah.
Then
I'm also on the left.
left.
I'm left as well.
Left.
You say right?
5-2, yes.
I think right also.
5-3.
I'm going left based on the color code.
6-3.
Yeah, left as well.
7-3.
Left, yes.
Okay, 8-3. So, so this was a small example just to demonstrate like how you might get information from the direct picture, but also you might get some information from the social environment in this case. So you might get as a feed what Trukti said, or what other people before you have said, in order to inform your decision, right? And then your final judgment is a combination of these two things. Actually, it turns out that in this case, the Van Gogh one is the one on the right.
No.
Yeah, so we as a crowd, we failed miserably on this task, although Trukti fed us with the right information at the beginning. So this had good chances of turning out well. So this is an actual experimental light one, yes?
Is the left one Gauguin?
Sorry?
Is the left one Gauguin?
I think so. I'm not perfectly sure, but we can have another quiz about that. That's I think the best answer. All right, so these are actual items from an actual experiment that was published in 2021 in Management Science, and we'll come back to these items, right? So here is a situation that was very similar to what we had here, where most people are like in favor of this item, although the other one is true, and then this might actually influence us and have a large impact on our own decisions. So, all right, so there are many types of situations where the popularity of alternatives might influence our choices. So we kind of were immersed in a social context, and a lot of what other people do influence our own choices. This has been also documented experimentally in many contexts. One of the most famous experiments is Solomon Ash's experiment from 1955. How many people in the room know about that experiment? Let's see. Raise your hands, please. Yeah, how many people do not know about Solomon Ash's experiment? Okay, yeah, so half and half. So Ash brought people in a room, and then he asked them which line, which is the most similar, or like the identical line to this one, and had them choose from the lines on the right. Okay, so to us it appears pretty obvious that it's the line in the middle that is the correct one. This is what our perception says. But what Ash did is that in addition to a control psychophysics types of experiment, he also had a room where there were actors, and they were actually answering incorrectly. And then, like we went around the room collecting answers, then the people who were giving answers before you, they were actually feeding you with the wrong information. Okay, so your kind of perceptual system would conflict with the social information that you would receive. Okay, so that was an important study. Also, think of the context. This is 10 years after the Second World War. This type of studies were also used to some extent as an explanation of like the atrocities that might have happened there. But so here's the control, like how many people get it correct. And here is the social influence condition, right? So 37% of people were willing to change their answer when other people before them like were sitting them with the wrong information. So this is a huge effect for any study in social psychology, and this is one of the things also that made this study so famous. Okay, but we can think of many other contexts contexts, like you can think of like cooperating with others. Are you much more likely to do it when other people before you have cooperated? You can think of like wine tasting and deciding whether the wine is good or not, petition signing, crowdfunding, and the list would go on, right? So you name it, you name a phenomenon, and then social influence, it's likely going to influence your decisions, okay? All right, so now there has been theory suggesting that when you have like random fluctuations in the beginning, like a troop feeding us with one type of information versus the other, plus positive feedback that is reinforced in a group, that this might lead to suboptimal outcomes. So in this particular case, the fact that the wrong information circulated was established early on might have led to a situation where like we as a group on a whole, deciding sequentially, were led to believe that, the wrong image was the one by Van Gogh. Okay? But you can think of similar situations in other contexts. You can think that we are stuck in suboptimal technologies. For instance, electric vehicles are still struggling to become popular. The combustion engine was invented in like the late 19th century, and then like there were some advantages that were built in the early 20th century. Electric vehicles could have been an alternative early on, but because some people were already using the one technology, this kind of made it really, really hard for the other technology to take off. The same with our keyboards, QWERTY, that's another famous example. We are stuck in a suboptimal version of the work. This is not at all the most efficient and optimal way to type, but rather typography worked in a very, very specific way, and this is a keyboard that's optimized not for human fingers, but rather by the way that typography worked in the 19th century. Okay, so we're try to fix it now. It's very difficult actually, because we're really locked into this situation where there are the learning effects and the feedback loops, but that make it very, very difficult to move on to something that is better. And you have other experiments like spread of misinformation, bandwagon effects in elections. This has been codified also as herding by economists, and again the list would go on. And what I'll do here is I'll show you a simple model that can kind of illustrate how this idea of locking and getting stuck to suboptimal outcomes might work. Okay, and then I hope this will not scare you off. Like the previous talk was really about like Halloween and fear, but okay, I hope this model is simple enough that will keep your attention. And the idea is that we have a graph here where we measure the current popularity of an item in terms of a proportion, the proportion of people doing something. And on the other side, we have the choice probability, like when you're asked which of these two items to choose, how likely you are to choose this as a function of the established popularity that something has. All right? And then you can derive a curve, okay? And then you would imagine that this curve is monotonic. Like the more people are doing something, the more likely that I'm going to do the same. Okay, but this might vary in different contexts. Okay, so what you see here is an equilibrium, and then let me explain a little bit more. Imagine that you start with the popularity of an item at 80%. Okay, and then the choice probability, the average choice probability of people at 80% would be around 60%. What would happen then? What do you think would happen? Any takers? So gradually, you would imagine that if the choice probability at 80% is 60%, the popularity of the item would decrease, right? So it would come to 60. But what happens then at 60%? Then the choice probability is 0.5, 50%. And then this process continues until this curve and the diagonal meet each other, and then at the point where they cross, then we have an equilibrium, right? Which is a prediction about how a large group, where a large group or a society might converge in the long term, right? Yeah. Any questions? Is everything clear so far? Okay, so this is a nice neat scenario, but let's examine another situation. In this case, we have more than one equilibrium. Actually, depending on which point exactly you are starting on this graph, you might end up on this position down here, where you're choosing something with a popularity of again, popularity choice probability of 0.1 roughly, or you might end up to this situation up here, to this equilibrium, where you have like a 80% chance of choosing something, okay? And then, again, depending on the randomness in the beginning, where you start, and then the reinforcement process, you might either end in one version of the world or another version of the world, okay? So this is a world that we'll call self-correcting world. Regardless of where you start, you always end up at the same point, all right? So it has just one equilibrium, whereas this is a world that is locking prone. That means has more than one equilibrium. Notice it crosses, this line crosses the axis 3 times. This is an unstable equilibrium, so you cannot get a solution here, you can only get solutions here and here. Okay? So essentially, for a curve to be locking prone, you need to cross into this region, which we'll call the locking region. Okay. All right. So this is not that this is an aggregate level theory. Okay. So it's like I take all the data and then I calculate the responses on average. But how about the individual level? So this aggregate level concept takes into account many individual level social influence here. So here we are a person who is not changing their mind, regardless of what other people say. They will always give the same response, and they will respond 40% one thing and 60% the other thing. Okay, so this is still probabilistic, and this is what we know by experiments, that people are giving probabilistic responses in like all sorts of stimuli. If you take binary choice, binary risky choice, and then temporal choice, typically you will see this type of response where you have a probabilistic function. So this is a person that probability matches, but probability matches according to what other people say. Okay. Here is a person that is very stubborn, or they know the answer, and they would never change their mind, and then they will stick with what they know. And here is one person who is kind of influenced in a more smoother type of way. Like this actually corresponds roughly to what we saw before, right? So you can aggregate all these types, and then you would get an aggregate level social influence curve. Okay. All right. So this is what I just showed you is a very old concept and has reappeared many times in the literature by many famous people. So here is Brian Arthur, 1989, probably the scholar that has worked the most with this idea of locking. Here's Herbert Simon, potentially the first instantiation of this in the literature, where he's making the argument that's actually very difficult to predict elections on the basis of polls, because you might have this social influence effect. Here is Thomas Schilling, 1978. This is the probability that you'll attend a riot or a demonstration as a function of the people expected to be there. Granovetter, 1978, he's a sociologist. He has the famous revolt model. It's kind of similar to that, and again the idea is like how many people are going to show up in a riot as a function to how many people are already doing it. And then Boyd and Richardson took this idea in anthropology and then discussed, like they used to explain why cultures might vary in different populations, right? So you might have different equilibria, and then you might end up to one group of humans or primates doing one thing, another group doing other thing, because of the path dependence. Okay, so this model has been around. So most of these people have worked independently of one another. So there hasn't been there have been interactions, but there hasn't been a common push for a unified framework and work on this paradigm. And I hope that we can take all the ingredients from what they've done before and then take it further and then make it possible to use in the modern context of experimentation. So, all right, so these two were economists, sociologists, economists, anthropologists. Okay, so also very framework that was used across the social sciences. So what was missing, right? So that kind of after the 90s, this framework kind of pattered out, and people stopped to use it. So what was missing? What was the ingredient missing that didn't make this framework very productive? What we're lacking, we believe, is experiments, and it's a particular type of experiment that is called a multiple world experiment. And here is the first multiple world experiment that was conducted by Salganik and his colleagues in 2006. How many of you know this study? Yeah. So Salganik et al. Developed an artificial music market. People could come online and they could listen to different songs by up-and-coming bands, and they could download the ones that they liked. Okay? So they had a control condition without social information, and they had 8 independent worlds where people were also shown the number of downloads of the songs. Okay? And then what Salganik et al. Argued is that it's very hard to predict what will become a hit in advance. So this is a function of the social information fed into the system, and like popularity reinforces further popularity. Okay? So you can predict what is going to flop, but you're not able to predict what is going to be the super hit. Okay? So that's the basic point behind this study. Now, this is to some extent hotly debated, and I'll come back to that. So one of the main innovations of this study, now look, we are in 2006. They had like thousands of participants, so this was a really involved study to conduct online at this point. It was still the time where people would volunteer their time in order to come and play into your experiments. So prolific and amateur didn't exist. But the main innovation was this idea of like multiple worlds. Okay, you restart the system from initial conditions, from the same initial conditions, and then you see how it evolves, and then you can compare the independent world, and then you can also compare with the control condition. Okay. So here is a variation of this experiment that came out in 2008. So remember that in the basic experiment, like it was very hard to predict what will become a success. So now what they did is they swapped the position of the first song and the 48th song, and then they tried to see if they leave this market evolve for long enough, what is going to happen. Okay, and then here you see the first song, it acquires popularity, the 48th song, not that many people download this one. Now if you swap them, notice the first song goes 48th in popularity, and vice versa. The first song is taking off, and the 48th song is kind of patterning out, right? So it has higher probability of choice, but better than before, but lower than song 1. Eventually this market is going to flip back, and song 1 is going to become more popular than song 48. Okay? If you do the same thing with song 2 and song 47, things are a little bit more dubious, so we might have a situation of locking. So it seems like some cases might be self-correcting, some, yes?
Is the song 1 inherently better or not?
Yes, you can measure that by the control condition. So you can see how many people were going to choose in the control, and then have the control condition as a way to indicate the inherent quality of the songs. Yeah? So here is another experiment of the same flavor that our colleague Arnold van der Dijk did. Who's also part of this paper. So he asked, in a binary choice setting, he asked which of these two paintings do you like best? Okay, or which one of these two Hollywood actors would you rather see to become a US president, Jack Nicholson or Meryl Streep? Etc. Right? So, or which one of these two balls do you prefer? Which one of these two wallpapers would you like to have on your screen? So 6 different questions, and then he gave a really big advantage on the items that in the control condition they had lower choice probability. Okay, so they started with a big advantage. So in the experiment that he did, all items eventually self-corrected. So Arnaud then wrote a big paper in 2019 in the American Sociological Review, where he pointed out this idea of the lock-in region, and he took data from many, many experiments, including us, Hure, Marget's, his own experiments, and Wheeler, this wine tasting experiment, and then he put the data on this plot, and then none of the data was falling in the lock-in region. All right, so kind of, okay, so this lock-in idea seems to work theoretically, but you don't see it very much in practice, at least until 2019. Okay. So, so he pointed out that many of the systems, of the social systems, actually might have this tendency of self-correcting. But at the same time that Arnaud was publishing his paper, his supervisor, Michael Macy, was publishing another paper, and on an experiment that has the following structure. So they got people of different political orientations in the lab, either Republican or Democrats, and then they gave them 20 statements of this sort. The character of the student is more important than the quality of the teachers in choosing the best school for one's children. Okay? So this would light up blue if there were more Democrats than the Republicans that were like voting for it, and it would light up red if it was more Republicans rather than Democrats. Okay, and what do they observe? Here you see the difference in the proportion of the two groups that were like voting for the item, and here you see the control worlds. So actually some are more Democrat, some more Republican, but the difference are not really big. And here is what happened in the dependent conditions, right? So these two things separate, and also a certain question could end up being more Democrat, or it could end up being more Republican. Okay, so it's kind of completely dependent from previous social influence and from like what information people have been fed. And they made the argument that a lot of the cultural worlds, whether some statements end up aligned one way or another, might be a historical coincidence. Here is another example. So that's the Van Gogh, famous Van Gogh question. So if you looked at data from the study, then they would look like something like that, right? So some of the times then there seemed to be like the group was converging in one of the images, and some of the time it was going to the other of the images. Okay, so this seemed, in both cases we have bistable systems. So it seems that here locking is possible. Both equilibria, we have two equilibria, and both are likely solutions of the system. So this raises a question. So why is locking possible in some cases, not in others? And here comes the marginal majority effect. We'll make the argument that the ranking of the items, so information about which of the items is more popular, and like the size of this effect is enough to determine whether a system is lock-in prone or not. Okay, and we have some previous work on that. So we've published a paper, theoretical paper in the Annals of Applied Probability, and we have also a paper that is geared more towards an economic audience, a working paper at the moment, that work with the case of many alternatives, and in this talk we are focusing the binary choice case. So note that this work is also funded by DFF Sapere-Aude grant. Now you can have many examples where rankings matter. Bestseller list a little bit like in the Salganic experiments. Media narrative, this person in the lead and they will likely win the election. And many others. And so how would the social influence curves look like if you would have a ranking or the marginal majority effect? So they would be, if you had no other type of influence, when one thing overtakes the other, then you will have a sharp increase in the probability of choice. Okay, so they will be, you would be saying one thing, or you would be responding with one probability when one item is ahead, and then this probability might increase when the other item is ahead. Okay. Now, in this case, again, we can have situations that are self-correcting or situations that are lock-in prone. Okay, so it depends again whether this curve crosses how many times it crosses the diagonal. Okay, so you can see that depending on what's the inherent difference in quality between the items, whether you end up in this situation where the inherent quality difference between the items is large, and you can take this point in the middle as the inherent quality difference. And if we had no social influence, that means that 75% of the people would vote for one and 25% for the other. So this is a big inherent difference. So in this situation, you would need a very, very large ranking effect in order to overcome the inherent quality difference. Okay, so we can make this point formally, and then we can say that the marginal majority effect makes locking possible for small enough differences in the inherent appeal of the items. Okay, and notice here the difference. So here we have these two situations where the inherent appeal of the items is the same, but in one on the left we have the marginal majority effect, whereas on the right have a much smoother curve, right? And then you notice that with the marginal majority effect you end up in this bimodal world. Whereas in the other case, although you have a lot of social influence, you can end up in a bimodal world. Okay, now let's look at some real data from the Macy 2019 experiment. Okay, so here's what the data look like. So in this experiment, almost all questions locked in, 19 out of the 20 questions locked in. And if you take the data and then you plot it on a similar social influence curve framework, then you'll notice that all these questions that actually lock in, they cross the diagonal in 2 different points. Any questions so far? Yeah, so you can measure the probability of choice when one thing is ahead, probability of choice when the other, and then you can plot these curves. All right. How about when you have the marginal majority effect, but you also have other popularity information? What would happen there? So you might have a steadily increasing social influence curve, but also on top of that, you might have a jump here in the middle. And this might, again, cause this instability of the system. All right, so again, we can theoretically show that when the marginal majority effect, as R here, is larger than the inherent popularity difference of the items, then the system is lock-in prone. Okay? And also for this statement, we can go and look at real data, and here are the results from the Freyne-van der Eyck experiment 2021. The question that we had in the beginning comes from this study. They had 3 types of questions. They had art questions, visual questions, and geometric questions. Okay, and these are the data. So each line here corresponds to a different quiz question. Okay, then the size of the points corresponds to the amount of data that we had. So you'll notice that in many cases we have more data on one part of the graph, and this is especially in questions that were self-correcting, because like naturally the system will converge in this side, and therefore we'll get more data. But you'll also notice that there is in many cases sharp increase around the middle here that varies from one type of question to the other, and also you'll notice that many of the questions cross the diagonal more than once. Okay, so that's an indication that in many of these questions we actually get a lock-in type of behavior in a bistable system. So there is one more study, the one that I showed you that van der Eyck did in 2019. We can also plot the data from that study in the social influence curve framework, and then if you do that, you'll notice that all items are actually below the diagonal. There are 1 or 2 cases where you have a sizable social influence effect, but it's not enough to overcome the quality difference. So let's now put everything together. All the items from all the 3 studies that I showed you, Macy and colleagues 2019, Freyne-van der Eyck 2021, and van der Eyck 2019. And what you see here is, on one hand, you see the ranking effect or the marginal majority effect. On the other side, you see the difference in inherent appeal of the items. So our theory essentially predicts that we should observe locking when we are above the diagonal here. Okay? And then below, we shouldn't observe locking, and things should be self-correcting down here. Okay? Then we can pick these parameters from the data and then put them all on the same plot. And then you'll notice that actually we can predict with very high likelihood whether a system is going to lock in or not on the basis of our theoretical results. Okay, so notice locking almost always happened in Mason colleagues. It happened some of the times in Frank van der Rijt. It never happened in van der Rijt 2019. So could locking have happened in the case of van der Rijt 2019? So there are ranking effects there and marginal majority effect. So if he had picked items where the quality difference were smaller, indeed would expect that locking would be there. Okay, and then you can play with these two parameters in your head and think what would have happened. So last is it possible to get this effect? Is it possible to get lock-in otherwise when you have smoother curves that are actually smoothly increasing? And we did some simulations based on the logistic function. Okay, so in this function you can manipulate the parameter b in order to get curves that are more S-shaped. Okay, so initially if you look at the results here, so you'll start with situations where although you have social influence, you cannot get the possibility of locking, but eventually for a high enough b parameter, then you'll end in the locking region. Okay, and then you have the possibility of locking. Now notice, in all those situations, then the proportion of the item that is locked in, the proportion of choice in the situation of locking, the second equilibrium is very high. So that would be 80% or above. So you can get locking with an appropriate S-shaped function, but this locking would be a winner-take-all situation, right? So like the QWERTY typing system, right? Almost everybody is using it. There are only very few freaks that do not use it. So now how about the situation with a ranking effect? So here we can also have, so we can get the modality, the bistable system, but you can have equilibria where the locked-in item has a much lower proportion of choice. And actually, this hasn't been pointed out before in the literature. So these type of situations were thought to be unstable by nature. And we show that they are theoretically possible. Okay, so eventually, in order to get a locking on a small majority, you need an effect that is very much locking a marginal majority effect like, right? So you need something that will look very much like a discontinuity in your curve if you look at real data. All right, so that was it. So propose the marginal majority effect as a discontinuity, a sharply increasing probability as popularity crosses 50%. So the marginal majority effect makes a system much more likely to be lock-in prone. It can be present even without salient ranking cues. So for instance, in the case of the van der Rijt experiment, there was no salient obvious ranking of the items, that people picked it up from the numbers. Now, the size of this effect predicts the possibility of locking. And only the marginal majority effect can lead to a lock-in on a small majority. Otherwise, it's very hard or impossible to get. Okay, so that was it. Thank you for your attention, and looking forward to your questions.